You've already made this decision, not once, multiple times. You've sat with it, thought it through, told yourself this is the time. You meant it. You still mean it. And the thing, whatever it is still sitting there, undone, exactly where you left it. And the strangest part isn't that you didn't do it. The strangest part is that you can't explain why. There's a word for this in behavioral science. Researchers call it the intention-behavior gap. And for decades, psychologists assumed it was a motivational problem, that people who didn't follow through simply didn't want it badly enough, that the solution was more desire, stronger commitment, a better reason. But in 2002, a psychologist named Paschal Sheeran did something no one had done before. He collected 422 separate studies on the relationship between intention and behavior. Studies from different countries, different behaviors, different populations. And when he analyzed all of them together, the finding was not what anyone expected. Intentions, clear, genuine, conscious intentions, explain only about 28% of the variance in what people actually do. 28%. That means nearly 3/4 of what you do has nothing to do with what you intended. The person who said they'd go to the gym, the person who decided to start eating differently, the person who resolved again to stop putting off that conversation. They weren't lying, they weren't weak. Their intentions were real, and the intentions still didn't do what intentions are supposed to do. This is one of the most replicated findings in all of behavioral psychology, and most people have never heard it, because the story we've been told, the one that says knowing plus deciding equals doing, turns out to be missing most of the picture. Here's what that missing picture looks like. Think about someone who has decided, genuinely decided, to start exercising. They've thought about the benefits. They know the research. They've been meaning to do it for months. Every few weeks they recommit. They feel the motivation spike when they think about it. And then, Monday comes, Tuesday, Wednesday, the week ends and nothing happened. Now think about someone else. They don't think much about fitness. They're not particularly passionate about it. But on Monday and Thursday mornings, their running shoes are sitting next to the front door. Their alarm goes off at 6:45, and they go. Not because they're more motivated, not because they care more deeply, but because the architecture around the behavior is completely different. This is the gap that 422 studies were pointing at. Not a gap in wanting, a gap in structure. But here's what most people never notice. And this is the part that changes everything. When we fail to follow through on something, the story we tell ourselves is almost always the same. I don't have enough discipline. I'm not consistent enough. Something is wrong with me. The failure becomes evidence about who we are rather than information about what was missing. BJ Fogg, a behavioral scientist at Stanford, spent years building a model that describes, with unusual precision, what actually needs to be true for a behavior to happen. His model has 3 components: motivation, ability, and a prompt. And Fogg's most counterintuitive finding is this: motivation is the least reliable of the 3. Not because it doesn't matter, but because motivation fluctuates constantly, with sleep, with stress, with what kind of day you had. It's highest at the moment you make the decision, and lowest at the moment the behavior is actually due. The motivation you feel on Sunday night when you're planning your week has very little relationship to the motivation available to you on Thursday morning when the alarm goes off. Relying on motivation to produce behavior is like expecting the weather to cooperate. Sometimes it does. Most of the time it doesn't. Ability, how easy or difficult the behavior is to initiate, is far more stable. And a prompt, a specific, concrete trigger that signals this is the moment, is something you can actually design in advance. Most people, when they fail to follow through, increase their motivation. They listen to something inspiring, remind themselves of their reasons, make the decision one more time with more feeling. Fogg's research suggests this is almost exactly wrong. The failure isn't usually in the motivation. It's in the absence of a clear enough prompt and a low enough barrier to start. Now here's where the research gets genuinely useful. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Peter Gollwitzer at New York University noticed something that had been hiding in plain sight. He was studying goal setting, and he made a distinction that sounds simple but turns out to be profound. He separated two completely different types of intentions. The first type, which he called a goal intention, is what most people have. I intend to exercise more. I'm going to eat better. I want to call my parents more often. These are statements of aspiration. They describe a desired outcome, and as we've established, they predict actual behavior about 28% of the time. The second type, which Gollwitzer called an implementation intention, has a completely different structure. Instead of describing what you want, it describes exactly when and where and how. It takes the form of an if-then plan. If this specific situation occurs, then I will do this specific thing. Not, I'm going to exercise more, but if it's Monday or Thursday morning and my alarm goes off at 7, then I put on my shoes and walk outside. Not, I want to eat better, but if I sit down for lunch, then I add one vegetable before anything else. Not, I should work on that project. But if I open my laptop, then I work on the project for 10 minutes before I check anything else. Gollwitzer ran a meta-analysis of 94 studies testing implementation intentions. The effect size was 0.65, which in behavioral research terms is considered medium to large. People who used if-then plans followed through 2 to 3 times more often than people who had the same goal but stated it only as a goal intention. 2 to 3 times. Not because they wanted it more. Not because they were more disciplined. Because they had offloaded the decision from the moment of execution to the moment of planning. And this is the part that most people miss about why this works. When you form an if-then plan, when you specify the exact situation and the exact first physical action, you are not just making a more detailed decision. You are changing the cognitive mechanism that initiates the behavior. Goal intentions require a fresh act of willpower at the moment of execution. You have to remember the goal, weigh the desire to do it against the desire to not do it, decide to act, and then actually act. That's 4 steps, all of which require a functioning prefrontal cortex that isn't too tired, stressed, or distracted. Implementation intentions bypass most of that, because the cue, the specific situation, has been mentally linked in advance to the response. When the cue appears, there's no decision to make. There's only this situation, this action. The behavior initiates the way a reflex initiates, not automatically exactly, but something much closer to automatic than what goal intentions produce. Neuroimaging research has confirmed this is a real shift. People using implementation intention show activation in brain regions associated with attention and automatic retrieval rather than effortful deliberation, which is why they work particularly well at the end of a hard day, when willpower is depleted and motivation is low. They don't need the resources that decision-making requires. The plan has already made the decision. There's one more layer to this, and it goes deeper than planning strategies. Think about the difference between someone who says, I want to start meditating, and someone who thinks of themselves as a person who meditates. On the surface, that might seem like a small distinction, but in terms of behavior, it's enormous. When a behavior is consistent with how you see yourself, it requires very little effort. It doesn't feel like discipline, it feels like just what you do. Because it is. It's who you are. The person who never misses a workout isn't fighting themselves every Monday. They're not summoning motivation. They're just doing the thing that people like them do. But when a behavior is inconsistent with your self-image, when part of you still identifies as someone who should exercise more rather than someone who exercises, every instance of that behavior requires overcoming resistance. You're not just doing the thing. You're doing the thing against the grain of who you believe yourself to be. This is why the same behavior that's effortless for one person can be a constant struggle for another. And it's why the most durable behavior change often happens at the level of identity, not aspiration. Not, I want to achieve this thing, but I am becoming the kind of person who does this thing. Because identity, once established, produces behavior far more reliably than desire. Here's what this all adds up to. The gap between knowing and doing is not a gap in willpower. It's not a gap in wanting. It's a structural gap between an intention that was formed without the conditions that behavior actually requires and a world that doesn't automatically provide those conditions for you. The motivation was probably there. The knowledge was certainly there. What was missing was a specific enough cue, a low enough friction, and an identity that made the behavior feel like something you do rather than something you're trying to do. You are not someone who lacks discipline. You are not someone who doesn't follow through. You are someone who has been using a model of human behavior that the research has consistently shown to be incomplete. A model that assumes deciding is enough, that knowing is enough, that wanting it more is the answer. It isn't. But the actual answer turns out to be something you can work with. The gap between knowing and doing isn't about you. It's about the architecture around the behavior. And architecture, unlike willpower, is something you can actually design.